He's opinionated. He's unapologetic. He's always real. He is Brett Mason. This is the Brett Mason Show.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show today. Hello to everyone who's subscribed on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and YouTube. You can find us on all those platforms by searching for Brett Mason Show. That's Brett with 2 T's. And a special hello to everybody who has downloaded and is listening on our customized iOS and Android apps. They're free to download. And again, search for Brett Mason Show to find them. The easiest way to find all the ways you can connect with us is by heading on over to the website, brett-mason.com/connect. Don't forget the dash. Brett with 2 T's, brettmason.com/connect with a slash. I'm very excited today. I have a co-host on with me, brand new today. Jeff Lyons is his name. Jeff, welcome to the show, buddy. Glad to have you on.
Hey, man, how are you doing, Brett? I'm glad to be here. Super excited to get into these topics that we've sort of been discussing. Lots to go over.
Absolutely. I put out kind of a cattle call on Reddit, which is, I spend entirely too much time on Reddit. This will be one of the few times Reddit was actually useful to me. But I posted in the Libertarian Forum, looking for somebody who was passionate about politics and liberty and freedom and had a libertarian slant to their views. And Jeff hit me up and said, yeah, I'd like to try that. And so we've just been talking over the last week. So I'm very excited to see how it goes. Now, where is it that you are from, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm from Southeast Louisiana, and I would hesitate to put a push pin on the map. I've lived pretty much anywhere south of Baton Rouge and between Lake Charles and the Mississippi state line. Currently, I'm residing in Ponchatoula, a little area north of the North Shore, but the weather's nice and there's water nearby, and that's about all I need.
LSU fan, Saints fan?
Absolutely, 100%, and we're not going to get into any of that with you.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good idea. I'll tell you what, though, we may wind up talking smack when it gets close to that LSU Auburn game coming up.
Hey, those are always they're always my favorite games, to be honest with you. My mom's a huge Bama fan, and my dad likes Auburn. So,
what is it that you do for a living? You don't have to give specifics. You can do broad strokes, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I've been in business for myself through various ventures since about 2005. I'm now on about my 8th company, and I also do a lot of consulting, primarily in technology startups.
You identify yourself, I guess, as libertarian now. How did you make the path? Because I'm assuming you weren't always libertarian. How did you make the path to a more libertarian viewpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I was really, I guess, best classified as a Mark Levinite conservative for the majority of my adult life, and really once I went into business for myself and started navigating this sort of regulation or the regulatory hurdles, so to speak, hiring, firing, the paperwork associated with that. Thankfully, Louisiana is a right to work state, but just dealing with those things, I started to come against some really strange and peculiar behaviors from the local and state government and also federal government. And so I just started becoming at odds with that. And then furthermore, as I've sort of matured, those interests and changes, so to speak, have extended into things like the criminal justice system in this country, state rights. And like I told you the other day, the rabbit hole of liberty is deep and fast, man. And so once you start exploring these avenues and really opening your mind and allow your mind to be changed, you just find yourself on the side of liberty. You find yourself on the side of the founders. You find yourself on the side of the Constitution. And so that's sort of where I'm at today, and continually moving down those channels.
I'll tell you, one of the things I've found interesting as I have become more and more and more libertarian through the years is how far removed the way media, school, other methods of education, how far removed they are from the original intents of the founders. So that if you have the definition most people have of liberty today and freedom is so far removed of what we started out. It's really quite scary how we've been drugged more and more and more away from that and it just seems normal. Like what people accept as freedom today is so far from the original freedom our founders intended it.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, don't get me wrong. I mean, this sort of Diet Coke version of freedom and liberty that we have in this country is still far in advance of most places in the West and of course, throughout the world. But understanding the original intent is laid out by the great men who sort of put this country together and sort of wrestled with these ideas and these themes coming out of a persecutory background. And understanding that, imperfect as it will be because it's run by men, and obviously men are imperfect, the blueprint that they put together, even in this watered down version, in the face of, things like regulation and surveillance and those things, there's still that sort of drive, within most people to have life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness. And I think that, I think the country isn't lost, and I think that we can get back to those principles, but you have to exercise the principles and get educated.
Much like you find that where you live in life, you also have to go looking for it. Like a more libertarian point of view doesn't just pounce on you. You kind of have to be looking for it. But where you out in life determines that a lot. And one of my favorite stories, and I haven't told this in a while, is my mother, who was coming up on retirement, and she wanted one thing more in the whole world, Jeff, was to make little baked goods like cupcakes and things like that in her kitchen and sell them, right? Just as, obviously she didn't want to be some huge business mogul. She just wanted to have a little part-time hobby that makes some extra money in her retirement. So she begins that process. And fast forward 2 years later, because they wouldn't allow her to do that out of her kitchen, she now has a $20,000 building sitting out on the edge of her property that still hasn't passed inspection, still to this day. All in all, I think she's about $30,000 into it, and she still can't bake one cupcake and sell it to somebody. That's government regulation for you. It's so ridiculous. It's completely preposterous, the stranglehold that regulation and that the government has on, particularly on entrepreneurs or people who just want to provide for themselves, or even just like my mom, have a hobby and not be a full blown business but make a few extra dollars. It's really ridiculous.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, we have a lemonade day here in Louisiana. Y'all may have something similar there in Alabama, where the government sets up these stations where you can get supplies, and it encourages entrepreneurship and small business. And these kids go out and they do lemonade. I mean, just like they've been doing since the 50s. And actually, contrasting that, there's states where they have actually gone in. I mean, there's articles you can find, Google it, government lemonade stand, et cetera, where they're shutting down 8-year-old girls from selling lemonade due to possible health code violations. So I can completely understand your mother's frustration in that regard.
Absolutely. These little kids who may on a hot Saturday afternoon may make $10 selling lemonade, having to buy a $50 permit to set up their little lemonade stand. It's just, it's beyond the pale, and it's getting worse.
Knowledge is sexy. This is the Brett Mason Show.
First on the list is probably I have a couple of big passions, Jeff, and you'll get to know this, but one of them is the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment is nearly completely 100% dead in this country. And the odd thing about it is it seems like less and less people care. Like even people in my circle of friends and family, they don't really see the problem with the violations of the Fourth Amendment. And, that's one thing. I mean, it sucks because there's nobody to hold government accountable. But then when you see the people at the highest levels of government who have no regard for the Fourth Amendment, and of course, most recently I'm talking about Christie, it becomes increasingly frustrating. Probably one of the high points and most contentious points of that first joke of a debate that they had a couple of weeks ago was between Rand Paul and Chris Christie over, Fourth Amendment warrants, phone records, et cetera. And Chris Christie just showed he had no regard for the Fourth Amendment. He didn't think that was required in any regard. And he has continued that. He hasn't backed down from that. That's the scariest thing to me. He hasn't backed down from that. Just a few nights ago, he was on Greta Van Susteren's show, and he was asked why couldn't he get a search warrant for phone records. And he said, and this is a quote, "Because if you don't have probable cause, you can't get a search warrant." And it amuses me to no end that that's his justification. I don't have any probable cause, so I can't get one. So why should I look for one? We just need to go get phone records from people. It's almost as if it's arrogant, but I wonder if it's more ignorance than arrogance. I'm not sure. Maybe it's a combination of the two.
Well, I mean, yeah, exactly. The key that you just said is he made that statement in the debate, and it was ridiculous. But the problem and the more disturbing thing, like you just alluded to, is that does not appear to be a flub. It doesn't appear that he misspoke. It doesn't appear that he was misconstrued. He's doubled down really on this idea that, in pursuit of security and safety, or really, the illusion of security and safety, that American citizens could be subject to any type of invasion of privacy, search or seizure, so long as the ends justify the means. And I mean, the funny thing is, it seems that the longer these people are in power, the longer they're in government on both sides of the aisles. I mean, this guy has been a special prosecutor. He's been a governor. He's held other various posts. He's now a prospective presidential candidate. And at every step in that road he's walked, he has sworn to protect and uphold the Constitution. And so one of two things is going on here. He either doesn't understand what is in the Constitution, or probably more precisely and nefariously, he knows exactly what's in there. He knows exactly what he's saying, and he's actively trying to subvert it. And we're seeing this on both sides, but just not in such a demonstrative fashion. It's really mind-blowing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times, he said it in the debate, and he has said it subsequently in interviews. He has used the phrase, "I don't apologize. I make no apologies." And, we talked earlier about the founders. A lot of people will laugh at you referring to the founders, but I can just imagine some guy running for president saying those words in front of Thomas Jefferson or George Washington or somebody like that. I mean, I'm sure they would have been brought down swiftly and probably painfully had they been trying to take over the White House of the United States based on beliefs like that. It's scary how far we've come where somebody thinks it's okay to say things like that. And I see my Republican friends all up in arms over Bernie Sanders being a socialist and how scary that is for the country. Yet they wholeheartedly support this guy. And I'm like, I think this guy may be a little worse, and he's a Republican.
Yeah, I know. And Rand Paul, for his part, he's an imperfect candidate, Brett. I mean, all of them are. But he caught a lot of heat because he's mentioning, during these early rounds of this nomination process, the fact that, the revolution, in his opinion, was fought for exactly, the reasoning behind the Fourth Amendment. And he quoted, obviously not 100% accurately, John Adams, referring to the fact that, his words exactly, Paul's were, that the spark that led our war for independence was the Fourth Amendment, and standing for the Bill of Rights is important, but the fact of the matter is there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, to the point where a lot of these gotcha websites are looking into it and doing their digging and researching the history. And the truth of the matter is the Fourth Amendment is a cornerstone of what makes America America. Like you said, the climate that these men lived in when they constructed this country, from scratch, out of the wilderness, was one where that was a very real issue. Searches, seizures, quartering of troops, monitoring of speech, and things of this nature. And so to see just totally how out of touch Christie is on this particular issue, which for me, is one of the biggest issues for me, it's really disconcerting. And unfortunately, like you said, many people, citizens and public officials included, seem to just not care.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it's, I know what it is. It's idealism, idealism mainly. I mean, people have a quote-unquote conservative ideology, and everything that doesn't fall within that narrow band of conservatism really is deemed unimportant. And for me, it's not even so much now as it's the future. Like I was making some arguments, a couple of weeks ago that got me in a hot water with a lot of people. And they were all really based on the future. It's on, what are your grandkids and great-grandkids, what are they going to be forced to deal with? And this Fourth Amendment thing, I tell you, it runs deep. I don't know how many people have looked at a map, but these checkpoints that they set up now, which in my opinion are highly unconstitutional, even though the courts have ruled they aren't. This whole thing about this quote-unquote constitution-free zone, where you're within 100 miles of the border. I was talking to a friend of mine down in Florida about this the other day, and he leans towards libertarianism, but he's still mainly a mainstream Republican. But I said, do you realize there's nowhere in the state of Florida you can go that isn't in this constitution-free zone now? Anywhere in Florida is within 100 miles of the border, and they can stop you without any reason really for any reason. And basically the way they have been conducting these things is really they give no probable cause. Occasionally a dog, and don't get me started on the dog issue. That's a whole other can of worms.
No, we'll cover that on a different occasion.
Yeah, because we could spend a whole show on that. I'm sure you probably feel like I do about that. But it's really scary. The Fourth Amendment is the last line of defense between you and a tyrannical government. It really is.
Yeah, and really the whole issue relative to the metadata, the NSA, the lack of ability to get a warrant for a specific issue due to probable cause really does echo back to that time pre-revolution. What they're really asking for and what they're really wanting, Christie and his ilk is an era that goes back to what they called writs of assistance. It's a general standing overarching warrant that gave, British law enforcement, which in Massachusetts, Adams' home state, super wide powers to inspect property and possessions for long times without any actual probable cause to do so. They wasn't required to have official, more specific permission to look at one thing or the other. What we would call a warrant today, right? And so those writs of assistance, I mean, the NSA is sort of the modern version of that. And I think that it's something that not only should be discussed, but, we need to demand answers as to, what exactly, this brand of liberty that we're being, sold by the Republican Party these days actually comprised of.
Yeah, it's scary how closely that and today parallel each other. It really is a very close parallel.
Download the free Android or iOS app. Search for The Brett Mason Show.
Probably one of the things I love most about becoming a libertarian is that I get to attack the left and the right equally, which is what we're about to do as we talk about this Hillary Clinton debacle. I was very happy when you messaged me and said this is one of the things that you wanted to talk about today, because I laugh and get angry when I hear some of the things Hillary Clinton said, and this right here was no exception.
I mean, this defies credulity. I mean, I hate to laugh, but like you said, it's infuriating and it's funny at the same time. What's infuriating is the fact that she can do things like this and get a pass not only from her party but from the quote unquote system that that she is a representative thereof. I mean, two different times in the past couple of days. The first one is she's been asked over and over again about the server wiping. Have you wiped the server? Have you wiped the server? Have you wiped the server? And she's always said, I have no idea, I have no idea, I have no idea. Well, now her new line is with a smirk. I hate to say this, but almost like a Ted Bundy kind of charismatic smirk on her face of, you mean like with a cloth or something, quote unquote. And then the other thing, so that was to, I guess, appeal to the gentry of the party and to the established media, and then to hammer it home to the younger crowd, she made a big point about now being on Snapchat and said, by the way, you may have seen I've launched a Snapchat account. I love it. I love it. Well, why does she love it? Again, because those messages disappear all by themselves. I mean, this is just, it's insane, Brett. I don't even really know what to say about it. And so if you've got some thoughts on this that can at least bring me back to the real world relative to it, so that I just, don't have to spend my day smiling and complaining simultaneously, I'd really appreciate that.
Well, I've tried to think of a time in recent history, or even further back in history, but just in any recent history since I've been an adult, where a person at such a high level in politics would be so flippant and have such disregard for something that's pretty serious, and almost challenges you, says things like this that almost challenges you to come after. It's almost as if I'm going to just spit in your face and I dare you to try to come after me on it because I'm above it all and there's just really nothing you can do about it. Now, keep in mind, she's one of the Clintons, Bill being the other one. They have a long track record of being above the fray. You can go and talk about running deep into rabbit holes. This is suicides, cover-ups, deaths. I'm not going to get off into the conspiracy aspect of it, but they've been involved in some pretty deep things in their career in politics, and they always seem to just somehow hover right above it. And it's almost as if she knows that, and she can just be completely flippant about it and do the, like you said, the quote unquote, just wink out of one corner of the eye at you while she's like, yeah, I know, what you going to do about it?
I think that this one might be different, though, Brett. I really, really do. I think that she's pushed the envelope of being a Clinton so far and so hard that I don't know that she's going to be able to walk this thing back. I mean, listen, the facts of the case are this. She was maintaining a private email server. That is against the law. She was having that private server maintained by evidently some company operating a loft that had it in a bathroom, if that can be believed. Furthermore, she admittedly deletes 30,000 out of 66,000 emails and then broadcasts it in terms of pages so as to make the number higher. Then her personal lawyer yesterday comes out and says, her or her team wiped the entire server before handing it over to the FBI. And now we've got the FBI saying, hey, guess what? We're pretty confident that we can get a lot off of this thing anyway. So good luck with that. And really not to get into the sort of politics of the Democrat Party, but I think that Barack Obama's largely thrown her overboard, Brett. I don't think he's going to save her. I think that this is going to be a long process, and during that process, she's going to be hammered on a continual basis. They're saying as long as 6 months to really get to the end of this thing, but I really do believe she's going to be indicted. I really do believe that. I think it's a bridge too far, even for her and her ilk. And it's going to be very interesting. But all you can really do in the face of something like this is laugh. I mean, and it's sad that that's the case, but in my opinion, that's the case.
I'm able to laugh at it more because I don't think there's a chance in hell that she'll win the presidency. And I think there's two things at play here that are work strongly against her. One of them, like you said, her own party. They're kind of sick of the Clintons in general. I mean, I think they kind of got sick of the Clintons back when Barack was steamrolling his way into the presidency, and some of the stabs that Bill Clinton took at him and some of the cheap shots he took and some of the things that they've said since then. I think the party as a whole is just kind of grown weary of the Clintons. And so I don't think they're as powerful as they used to be. And then secondarily, one of the most refreshing things that I see in this country now, even though it's highly misguided, don't get me wrong, it's completely misguided, but it's refreshing at the same time, is this populist upswell of supporting people who don't speak political speak, Trump and Bernie Sanders. I wouldn't vote for either one of those people to be president, not in a million years. But I do find it refreshing that they don't speak in political speak, and they're just a lot different than people like Hillary Clinton.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. Rush Limbaugh said something the other day. I had somebody message me and say, man, you got to listen to this statement. It's a very simple statement, but he was talking about the same sort of effect that Bernie Sanders and Trump are having relative to not playing the game. And what he said is, judging by the outpouring of support for Trump and for Bernie Sanders, again, not that I'm interested in either of those two people running the country, that outpouring of support, in his words, tells him that the country is not lost, but that Washington is lost. And I think, that's kind of sent shivers down my spine when I heard that, even though it was coming from Rush Limbaugh. The country's not lost, Washington is lost. Because, like you said, I really believe that the core of this country, who also vote, by the way, whether on either side of the aisle, whether conservative or socialist, Democrat, Republican, they're over it. They're over it. So I believe we're going to get change out of this election. Now, whether it's change for good or bad remains to be seen. But I'm almost to the point where any sort of change is better than the status quo that we've been sort of experiencing over the last 4 or 5 cycles.
I'm 100% on board with that. I mean, when my friends told me I was going to be responsible for this person losing the election because I voted libertarian or I voted independent, I was like, I don't care. No matter who wins it, it's going to be bad. So I don't care. Whoever can get in there and can mix things up and stress people out the most so that they come to the realization we have a problem, I just really don't care. And to your point, I've been saying for about 8 years now is when I kind of moved over into the philosophy of it really is we the people. All this blaming politicians only goes so far. Politicians do not get power unless the people elect them. So it's kind of that you have to, the buck stops here thing. It is the population of the United States of America that is responsible for what's in power. And the fact that these guys are up there, not 6 years, not 4 years, but they're up there for 36 years and 40. Come on, whose fault is that? Whose fault is that they stay in office that long or get elected to begin with? And so if there is some awakening of the American people, even though I do believe it's misguided at this point, I think they're right now they're not voting, but in these polls they're voting. They're voting style over substance, and style over what's important. At least they're saying we're tired of the style. At least they're saying we're sick of the staged question and answered town halls. We're sick of the 5 talking points you come out and say no matter what the question is. At least they're saying we're sick of that. So that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. And this is something that, obviously is going to be revisited over and over and over again over the course of this election cycle. But I really do believe that, we're going to get a different outcome. We're going to get a Nixonian outcome from this thing. And I think that it's going to be interesting to watch.
If it moves to something of that level, I'll be floored, but I will applaud it the whole way. And I think it could be a turning point for the country. So I follow it closely, and I do laugh more than cry. And that's encouraging.
This is the Brett Mason Show.
For something, in my opinion, that is not remotely funny, and I'm going to let you run with this because this is in your backyard. Talk about this situation going on with this gentleman relative to this court case where they're trying to force him to become sane in order to testify against himself, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, this is just right down the road for me. It's literally 15 minutes from where I live, and this story wraps up so many things that I'm passionate and concerned about. For at least 2-3 years, I've been very concerned about people getting arrested for posting stuff on Facebook. We had the military man not too long ago was arrested for posting song lyrics on Facebook. And granted, those lyrics weren't pleasant, but they were just song lyrics. He's still in jail over that. And we've continued to see more people arrested for just things that they post on Facebook. I did a story on the podcast last week about the new technology that's in the Facebook messaging system now. It has taken the private messages of past known criminals who used Facebook, and it has archived the phrases and words that they used when they talk to people. And they now run an algorithm against your messages with your friends. And if they correlate to past messages with past criminals, it's flagged and sent to a person to personally review, who will then forward it to authorities if they think there's something serious there. Look, we voluntarily use Facebook, so there's nobody to blame for that but ourselves. But I think the trend overall is scary. So there's that aspect of it. Then there's the aspect of the criminal justice system, which is so far off the rails in this country, it isn't even funny. I mean, we imprison people at the drop of a hat now. It's like our new national pastime. It used to be baseball. Now it's locking people up and throwing them in jail for the most mundane, stupidest of things ever. And then third, it's the mental health issue in this country, which is also huge. And you see it in these people who do the mass shootings. You see it in the people who make the threats like this guy. There's just a lot of issues, and then how they're dealt with. And this guy is accused of threatening to kill President Obama. Now, apparently, it's because of things he posted on Facebook, and I haven't been able to find out exactly what he posted on Facebook. And that's been one of the things that I've been trying to find. I do know what he told the people after he was arrested, what he told the investigators and the authorities after he was arrested, and this is quotes from the news story. Quote, God told him God was going to destroy Obama and everything around him. And he also told investigators God was speaking through him, and God uses the Spirit to speak but not to kill. If he was posting things like that on Facebook, first of all, obviously he's disturbed. I'm not saying the guy's disturbed. I think it's pretty clear he is. But I hear people in church say stuff all the time about God's going to destroy America, and God's going to bring America to its knees, and God's going to do this and God's going to do that. I mean, if that's the standard that we're using to arrest people now, first of all, that concerns me a lot. And then secondarily, the fact that he does have mental issues and probably should be medicated, but that they want to force medication on him so that he is then competent to stand trial, which again, I have a whole host of issues with, because if he wasn't on those medications at the time he said those things, he wasn't competent then. So that's a clear-cut case for not taking the criminal justice route, that you need to take the mental health route, which I don't think is even being considered at this point in this case.
No, it's not. And that's the interesting thing. The judge in the case, and I researched this after you brought it to my attention, this is just a bizarre set of circumstances that encompasses a ton of issues in this country. Like you said, justice system, mental health problems, freedom of speech, forced medication, and forced docility. I mean, the situation is he was found incompetent to stand trial on these charges that he was threatening to kill the president. His words, as we're taking them from the authorities at this point, again, I haven't seen the post, is that he did not threaten to kill the president. God spoke to him. He has said in the past that God often channels his words through him for postings and video on Facebook. And so his words were twisted around. And like you said, listen, I went to an evangelical Christian church for a number of years. You can interpret the language however you want, but God, bringing his wrath against various organizations and crumbling the ground underneath them and washing them off the face. If that's the standard by which you're going to judge people, I mean, there's a ton of Christian churches that are going to have pastors prosecuted. But the interesting thing is, he's arrested on this charge, and evidently the charge isn't even legitimate. They twisted his words. He was found unfit to stand trial. And then he says, no, I'm actually fit to stand trial. So they have an evidentiary hearing to determine his competency. And then the judge says, essentially, I think it was 4 months, we're going to give this guy 4 months and medication to see if we can get his mind right enough to stand trial. But none of that speaks to the fact that he was competent or not competent at the time of committing the actual offense. So there's 5 things here going on, all of which, constitute a supremely bizarre case.
Yeah, and there's so many things about this that should worry your everyday person. And I think that's why this case is just, it's consumed my attention the past few days. Like you said, I mean, I was raised in a Pentecostal holiness evangelical church. They talk about things God is going to do to the country all the time. Matter of fact, half of my family would probably be in prison if this becomes the new standard for arresting people. So, obviously, did he have a weapon? Was the guy building a weapon? Do they have any evidence of him trying to acquire a weapon? Because you can't just kill the president. To me, and granted, we shouldn't be able to threaten the president. I have no problem with that. But you have to determine if the threat is legitimate. Like, what are the odds that I could ever get anywhere near the president and kill him? I would have to have some kind of brilliant plan. I'd have to have some kind of really super stealthy weapon that I made to get me through different levels of security. I mean, the level of planning it would take to take a president of the United States out far surpasses the mental abilities of this guy.
Well, I also think that the only other possibility here, Brett, is that this is a tacit admission by the government and by the prosecutor in the case that they believe not only is God real, but God is capable of being channeled and God is capable of striking down an American president.
Well, it seems that way. It seems like they took this, and then you're imprisoning the wrong guy. Aren't you really after God?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's just crazy. But, a bigger issue here that's not funny, and you touched on this briefly, is that, mental health care in this country is in bad shape, and what I'm seeing here that really is disconcerting is that, we're sort of moving in this area. Look, is the guy troubled? I don't know. Two experts on his side and one that was court appointed said this guy can't stand trial. This guy's got issues, but nevertheless, it harkens back to a time where, mental health was inseparable from prison, and it was a time where, reforming people and helping people to get better took a back seat to just getting them out of the community so that they couldn't make a disturbance anymore. And there was a lot of work done in that regard from the mid-1800s through the mid-1900s. And I really feel like we're moving backwards in that regard. I mean, listen, I live outside of New Orleans. New Orleans has a huge issue with homelessness. Homelessness has been correlated repeatedly with mental health problems. And these sweeps that take place, and again, this was actually at a federal level, they said that, no, you can't arrest somebody for simply sleeping on the street. But sweeps take place all the time. They come in, they round these people up, they try to get them beds, and if not, in some cases, or if they resist that effort, they go to jail. And why is that? It's being done in order to remove that sort of visual blight and disturbance, the panhandling and all of these things from a community, in New Orleans' case, that, its primary economic driver is tourism. And so, as impractical as it may seem, I mean, I really think that we need to start talking about, providing quality care for these people. And listen, the ones that are criminals, the ones that are violent, the ones that are dangerous, the ones that really do need to be supervised and put away. I mean, we have systems for that, but to lump everybody in together under this sort of jail and prison system, to me, is really sad, and it's really scary.
Well, and there's two aspects of that are really bad to me, Jeff. One of those is, like you said, it seems that we've taken the attitude of it isn't convenient for us to deal with those people, so let's just try to put them in prison and get them out of sight, out of mind. But the second big thing for me is, and in spite of the big disagreements I have with most war actions, and I have disagreements with a lot of them, majority of them, I still highly respect people who will sign on the dotted line to defend our country. The largest segment of people with mental issues in this country are our military veterans.
Our veterans, exactly.
And they deserve better than that. They just deserve better. You know, we put them in that set of situations. We put them through the events that caused that. And they deserve much better. So, again, that's another topic we could do a whole hour on.
You're experiencing the Brett Mason Show.
I've had several discussions about this concept in general, maybe not in the specific sense, but this issue of the minimum wage and what that's going to do to probably a lot of industries. This is specifically about the restaurant industry, but probably a lot of industries are going to start facing this same challenge as we see this push for minimum wages to increase to preposterous levels.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's been noted by everybody from Friedman in the Chicago school all the way over to the Austrian school, if you want to get into the economic theory behind a minimum wage, is that, you know, in no way is it ultimately, yes, it benefits a few people for a short period of time, but ultimately the damage that it does to the job market and to the economy in general is well noted. Anybody that would argue against that really just needs to get educated. But this is interesting. This story is essentially about the fact that not only are all of those things true, but you know, this minimum wage is going to contribute to, and I want to make sure this word is said, acceleration of automation. And acceleration because it's happening anyway. Listen, we could talk about a number of industries that this encompasses. You know, transportation is a huge one. Self-driving cars, self-driving trucks are not a fairy tale. It's not an if, it's a when. I mean, just last week, the first 18-wheeler, or I'm sorry, truck that can pull an 18-wheel rig was cleared and certified for operating without human intervention. That was actually in Texas. And so,
well, the industry I came from, Jeff, from radio. 15 years ago, we would have 10 to 15 people running one radio station. Now you will have 4 people running 3 radio stations. So, I mean, it affects every single industry.
No, and that's absolutely right. You know, but this is the thing. You know, the people that these minimum wage increases are, you know, supposed to help are the ones that, in this case, food service are going to be the most negatively impacted. I mean, my background is in food service. Before I went into business for myself, I worked at every level in food service, from washing dishes to managing corporate restaurants to operating as an executive chef, and I've seen it occur. In fact, the gentleman in the story that they were talking to is, you know, I believe he was worked for Middleby, and Middleby owns a lot of food service equipment brands. One of the brands that they popularized was the Middleby Marshall conveyor oven. That conveyor oven has, like you said, just like in radio, taken what used to take 8 people in terms of making pizzas and got it down to 2, one to put it in and one to take it out and cut it. And so the issue is here. I mean, business is business, and restaurants are a business. You got 3 variables. You got time, cost, and accuracy. And so increasing the wage to 15 is going to directly accelerate the viability of the cost variable. And so even more so, that's happening naturally. I mean, you know, go and look in any fast food or even fast casual restaurant, you know, from Chili's with its tabletop tablets, from McDonald's to its automated drink making machines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been a reduction by roughly 50% across the industry in staffing over the last 40 years due to automation. And this is going to cause people to invest heavily in not only research, but eventually purchases of automation technology. I do consulting. I can give you an interesting case. There's a company that came to me that's looking at deploying, you know, an inventory management system nationally. And so they were doing cost analyses, trying to find out how many sales reps and account managers and people to handle restocking they would need. And I came back and essentially for the cost of one person's salary per year, we could automate 90% of that and have one person handle a territory that it would have taken 15. And so this is just another case of unintended consequences brought about by government intervention in the free market.
Yeah, and it really affects those low skill jobs. That's who it's going to affect. It's affecting all marketplaces and at all levels to some degree, but the people who get affected the most are going to be the people on the lower end of the skill level. These would be entry level jobs and things like that. One of the interesting things to me is the way the left particularly demonizes this whole cost of labor and wages and things like that. And I can't remember who it was, but it was one of those guys that does the at the Mises Institute from the Austrian School of Economics. But he did a very interesting presentation one day where he described, how business people do what they do. And if you haven't been and this is the problem, most people in America haven't run a business. Like they haven't even run a Kool-Aid stand. So they don't really have a lot of knowledge of what is involved in that. But I mean, a businessman who has an employee, that employee has to more than pay for itself, or you don't pay him. I mean, that's just how simple it is. If I can pay this guy $8 an hour and he generates for me $9 an hour in revenue, then I can afford to pay him. But if he cost me $8 an hour to pay and he only generates $7 in revenue, then I can't afford that employee anymore. That employee becomes a burden. And it really is just about the math. And that's something people really fail to comprehend.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, this intervention in this regard, this sort of upsetting of the natural order of things, a sort of artificial inflation of wages, increasing the base cost of labor causes a complete reconfiguring of the sort of cost to benefit ratio of, labor, which we call human capital in the business world, and technology or automation. And look, people are already and have continually been rendered unemployable through no fault of their own. It has nothing to do with them. But the institution of a higher minimum wage is going to speed this dramatically. So it's not about the technology being bad. The technology is inevitable, but this increase in the minimum wage makes this inevitable cost effectiveness happen much more quickly.
Yeah, and one of the points you made in some of the notes we had preparing for the show, maybe you can expand on this because maybe I misunderstood it, but long term, you make the case that this is actually better for employees and the salaries of employees. No?
Yes and no. I mean, listen, if you take a look at agriculture, 200 years ago, 90-something percent, 91%, I want to say, of people worked in some regard to produce their food, right, for their consumption. As of today in America, that number is less than 2%. Okay, there's countries out there where the number's still in the 30 to 40%. Your Albanias, your sort of some third world areas, even some places in South America. But as America goes, the world goes. As technology goes, the world goes. And so the interesting thing is that, not working in the fields, not, having the sun on your back, not sweating and breaking your back, not having to involve your children who could be getting an education out in a field doing it. Those are all good things. And so it's ultimately to this point been a good thing for the workforce. The problem is, though, the newer forms of automation, and this is far too broad to cover today, are getting out of mechanical specialization and getting into, a ubiquity. It's not like a machine that operates to do a specific type of tack weld over and over and over again. These machines now are beginning to learn. And so there's a guy named CGP Grey. He does a lot of great content on YouTube. And, he has this horse analogy, which is really just hilarious but sad, but obviously needs to be taken into consideration. He has a statement: better technology makes more better jobs for horses. Right? That sounds ridiculous, but if you say better technology makes more better jobs for humans, a lot of people would buy that. Right? But the problem is, again, people are going to be rendered unemployable through no fault. We have to start thinking about what that's going to mean. Horses did dangerous jobs. They pulled plows. They ran Pony Express. They charged into battle. And so as those things became mechanized, horses now had newer and safer and more comfortable jobs to look forward to in the big city. And you could just think of it, as he said, CGP Grey, two Luddite horses having this conversation. Well, the automobile, if it takes off, listen, no big deal. There'll be newer and better horse jobs. I mean, we can't even imagine the horse jobs we're going to have. Well, listen, the horse population peaked in 1915. That's 100 years ago. How many horses did you see today, Brett?
Yeah, none.
You know what I mean? And so better technology does not make better jobs for horses. And at this point, now that we're out of specialization and we're into learning machines, better technology doesn't make better jobs for people either. And it's something we're going to have to deal with.
Yeah, it's a fact of the way things progress, technology, science, the field of electronics, and all these types of things continue to progress. But I'll tell you what, it's there can be. I had a debate with somebody about this about a month ago. It was a family member, and they talked about how much better things were. You pick the decade. I don't remember what decade, but you know this whole argument. And I'm like, I don't know about you, but in my entire adult life, I have never worked a job that involved me standing out under the hot baking sun all day, killing myself, only to retire back to a home that wasn't air conditioned and to where food was impossible to get, to keep, and store. I haven't lived in times like that. I'm sorry, those were not the good old days. But, you know, there's a lot less people working in you don't have people working the fields. You don't have people having to go out and shuck the corn and bring it in and store it and grow as a person, I mean, not as a company, but as individuals. We don't have to have hogs growing out in the back anymore to have meat. So there's changes. It involves less work. Sure, there's less jobs on the lower level, but I think as a whole quality of life, I don't think there can be any argument that our quality of life has increased.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, listen, people hate hearing this, and it is sort of cliche, but I mean, even those, I've been poor before, Brett. There was a time where, I lost a house to foreclosure. I've been evicted from places I was renting with my, with my family at the time. I've been unemployed. I've suffered through those sorts of things, but at no point in time ever during those, brief but painful eras, in my life and in a lot of people's lives, did I ever not have internet, cable television, a refrigerator, food, air conditioning, and a car, possibly two in the driveway.
Exactly. The definition of broke and poor is a lot different today than it was in 1920.
No, it's absolutely true.
Absolutely. Look, we had a host of other things to get to on the show. I'm going to have to throw an audible, toss a flag, and end the show today just due to the length of it all. But that's a good thing. I thoroughly enjoyed the first show with you today. I do sincerely hope that you'll come back and do another show and continued shows, because I think you add so much to the discussions that I normally was just having with myself. And you know what they say about people that have discussions with themselves. So,
yeah, they might be medicated and forced to stand trial,
Absolutely.
Well, listen, Brett, I really appreciate it today. I had a blast. I'd love to do it again, and keep doing what you do and keep fighting a good fight.
Absolutely. The other issues that were on the agenda for today, they're not time sensitive. We'll bring them back on next week's show. And I hope you guys will join us then. Remember to download the app, search for a Brett Mason Show in your app stores, and go to brettmason.com/connect. Remember the dash between Brett and Mason, brettmason.com/connect. And you can subscribe to the podcast. And we appreciate it. You guys have a day. Keep liberty alive. Thanks for listening.
You can subscribe to the podcast, download the free smartphone app, and find more ways to connect to the show at brett-mason.com/connect.